I think I might hold the world record for the fastest a new homeowner has ever been targeted by a power-drunk HOA president. But I definitely hold the record for being the only person whose HOA president tried to kick their door in at 3 in the morning because her imaginary master key didn't work. This story is absolutely insane, so find a comfy chair. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see how far these tales of suburban warfare travel. It all started because I made the catastrophic mistake of wanting a quiet life. The night it all came to a head, the night that became the linchpin of my entire counteroffensive, began not with a bang, but with a sound so subtle it wouldn't have woken most people. But I'm not most people, and my 2 dogs, sleeping on their respective beds at the foot of my own, were definitely not most dogs. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the soft crunch of gravel on my driveway was the first domino. I was already awake, my eyes snapping open in the silent dark. It's a habit you don't lose. A moment later, a low guttural vibration started in the chest of Ghost, the German Shepherd. It wasn't a bark, not even a growl. It was a professional alert, a deep hum that said, "I have detected a potential threat and am awaiting instructions." Simultaneously, Shadow, my Belgian Malinois, lifted his head, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, completely silent. He didn't need to make a sound. His posture was a coiled spring of lethal potential. I slid out of bed, my movements fluid and noiseless. My training, years of it in places far less pleasant than this manicured suburban enclave, took over. Heart rate steady, breathing controlled. I moved to the window, peering through a slit in the blinds. I saw it then. A gleaming white Range Rover, parked just past the edge of my property line under a streetlight, its engine off. And a figure, short and stout, marching up my walkway with the kind of misplaced confidence that only comes from being completely detached from reality. It was Brenda. Of course, it was Brenda. I moved to my front door, checking the feed from my high-definition security camera on my phone. The audio clicked on. Brenda was standing on my porch, fumbling with a small ring of keys under the dim glow of the porch light. She tried one, then another. She was muttering to herself, her voice a venomous whisper carried clearly by the sensitive microphone. "Come on, you cheap piece of junk. He probably changed the lock. Illegal modification. That's a $200 fine." I watched, incredulous. This woman, the self-appointed queen of our little suburban fiefdom, was literally trying to unlock my front door in the dead of night. When the keys inevitably failed because there is no such thing as an HOA master key for privately owned homes, a fact that seemed to elude her frustration boiled over. She rattled the doorknob violently. Then she balled up her fist and banged on the door, not like a neighbor asking for sugar, but with the rhythmic, percussive force of a battering ram. That's when the dogs, given a silent hand signal from me, were permitted to escalate. Ghost erupted in a deep, deafening series of barks that echoed through the house, the kind of bark that promises grievous bodily harm. Shadow joined in, his sounding higher-pitched, more frantic, a terrifying countertenor to Ghost's bass. On my phone screen, I saw Brenda leap back, clutching her chest. Vicious animals, uncontrolled. I knew it. She shrieked into the night. But then, her face contorting with rage, she drew back her foot, clad in what looked like a very expensive athletic shoe, and kicked my door. Hard. "Board president. Emergency inspection. You have to let me in," she screamed. That was it. That was the moment her reign of terror officially signed its own death warrant. But to understand how we got to a 3 a.m. siege over a non-existent key, we have to go back 6 months. I had bought the house for the yard. After 15 years as a military K-9 handler, my operational days were over. My 2 partners, Ghost and Shadow, were also officially retired. They weren't just pets, they were decorated veterans, and I owed them the most peaceful retirement I could provide. The house was perfect, a simple, single-story ranch with a sprawling, half-acre backyard, surrounded by a sturdy 6-foot privacy fence. It was quiet, unassuming, and at the end of a cul-de-sac. Perfect for 2 highly trained dogs to live out their golden years, chasing squirrels and sunning themselves on the deck. I closed on the house, moved my sparse belongings in, and spent the first week setting up a perimeter, checking the fence for weaknesses and establishing a routine for the dogs. It was bliss. The bliss lasted exactly 8 days. That's when I had my first encounter with Brenda. I was in the front yard, picking up a stray branch that had fallen from the oak tree, when her white Range Rover glided to a silent stop at my curb. The window hummed down, and a woman who looked like she was perpetually smelling something unpleasant peered out at me over the top of designer sunglasses. Her blonde hair was shellacked into a style I could only describe as a combat helmet. "You must be the new owner," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Brenda Clark, the HOA president." "Nice to meet you," I said, offering a non-committal nod. "I'm Alex." "I have your welcome packet here," she said, holding up a binder that looked to be about 4 inches thick. "You need to read all of it, immediately. We have very high standards in this community, and we enforce them. Your trash receptacles were still visible from the street at 9 a.m. this morning. Collection is at 7 a.m. They are to be stored out of sight by 8 a.m. I've given you a verbal warning this time." I blinked. "Okay, thanks for the heads up." Just then, Shadow, who had been lying on the cool grass in the shade of the porch, lifted his head and let out a soft woof to let me know a stranger was present. Brenda's eyes, magnified by her glasses, swiveled to him. Her upper lip curled slightly. "Is that your dog?" The realtor said the previous owner had a cat. "He's one of 2, I said calmly. "They're retired working dogs." "Well," she sniffed, her tone dripping with condescension, "you'll find the rules regarding pets in Section 12, subsection C. All waste must be disposed of immediately. No excessive noise. And they must be on a leash at all times when not on your property." She gave me a look that suggested she was already picturing my dogs rampaging through her petunia beds. "We're not really a big dog community, you understand." With that, she handed the ridiculously thick binder out the window, forcing me to take it, and glided away, leaving me standing in my own yard, feeling like I'd just been dressed down by a particularly nasty drill sergeant. I flipped through the binder. It was a labyrinth of nonsensical rules. The grass could be no more than 3 inches high, but no less than 2. Holiday decorations could not be put up more than 2 weeks before the holiday and had to be taken down within 48 hours after. The approved palette of front door colors was a thrilling spectrum of beige, slightly darker beige, and taupe. It was suburban tyranny in laminated plastic sleeves. This, I realized, was not going to be the peaceful retirement I had envisioned. It was going to be a war. And Brenda had no idea that she was trying to pick a fight with a man who had been professionally trained in how to win them. The first official salvo in Brenda's war against me and my dogs arrived via certified mail a week after our initial meeting. It was a crisp envelope with the HOA's professionally printed letterhead. Inside, a violation notice. The charge? Failure to maintain lawn aesthetics. The evidence? A grainy photo of my backyard, apparently taken from an upstairs window of the house behind mine, showing a single, solitary dog toy, a heavy-duty black rubber Kong lying in the grass near my deck. According to Brenda, this constituted yard clutter and was an affront to the community's visual harmony. The fine was $50. I stared at the letter, a dry, humorless laugh escaping my lips. This was the game she wanted to play. Fine. I paid the $50. In war, sometimes you concede a minor skirmish to gauge your enemy's tactics. Her tactic was pettiness, wielded with the blunt force of official-looking paperwork. My response was to escalate my own preparations. That weekend, I installed a comprehensive security system. Not just a doorbell camera, but 4 high-definition, night vision-capable cameras covering every angle of my property: the front, the back, and both sides. They all recorded 24/7 to a secure hard drive in my office with cloud backup. If Brenda or her spies were going to be watching me, I was going to be watching them right back. I also bought a decibel meter. I knew the next attack would be about noise. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, another certified letter. This time, a $100 fine for excessive noise violations. The complaint stated that my dogs were barking incessantly at all hours, disturbing the peace. This was a bold-faced lie. Ghost and Shadow were professionals. They barked when commanded, or to alert me to a genuine presence, like the mailman or a deer at the fence line. They did not bark incessantly. I checked my security footage. Over the past week, the total duration of any barking from my yard was less than 5 minutes, spread across 7 days. Meanwhile, the little white terrier 2 doors down, the one belonging to Brenda's close friend, had a perpetual, high-pitched yap that started every time a leaf fell. I took my new decibel meter outside and, from my property line, recorded the terrier's barking. It registered a consistent 85 decibels. The loudest bark I could coax out of Ghost, a single woof on command, barely hit 70. I drafted my first official response. I wrote a polite formal letter to the HOA board. I stated that I was contesting the fine. I included a log of my dog's activity, cross-referenced with timestamps from my security footage. I included a statement explaining their background as highly trained working dogs, emphasizing their stability and discipline. I also included my decibel readings of other ambient noise in the neighborhood, tactfully omitting the address of the yappy terrier, but making the point clear. I sent the letter, along with a DVD containing the relevant video files, via certified mail. I wanted a paper trail for everything. This response seemed to short-circuit Brenda's brain. She wasn't used to pushback, and certainly not organized, evidence-based pushback. There was no fine for 2 weeks. I thought, naively, that she might have decided I was more trouble than I was worth. Then came the newsletter. It was a glossy, 2-page affair that usually detailed scintillating news about the community garden's new mulch or reminders about recycling bin etiquette. But this one had a banner headline, New Community Safety and Access Initiative. My blood ran a little cold. I read on. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom, had decided that for the safety and security of all residents, the HOA needed immediate access to every home in case of emergencies, like a fire or a burst pipe, when the owner was away. Therefore, the board had unanimously passed a new bylaw requiring every single homeowner to provide a copy of their house key to the HOA. The keys would be stored in a secure lockbox, managed by Brenda herself, creating a community master key system. She wrote that compliance was mandatory and that anyone failing to provide a key within 30 days would be subject to a daily fine of $25 until they complied. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time, certain I was misunderstanding the sheer, unadulterated audacity of the words on the page. She wanted a key to my house. She wanted a key to everyone's house. This wasn't just an overreach, it was a staggering leap into illegality. No HOA on the planet has the right to demand access to the inside of a home you privately own. It was a breathtaking power grab, disguised under a flimsy veil of safety. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the unanimous vote was her bullying the 2 other feckless board members into submission. The real reason she wanted this power was clear to me. It was the ultimate tool of control. It would allow her to snoop, to inspect, to harass residents on a whole new level. And for a man like me, with my background and my dogs, the idea of Brenda Clark having a key to my front door was not just unacceptable, it was a threat I had to neutralize completely. I immediately started my research. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to dismantle the entire foundation of her authority. I went to the county courthouse and pulled the official, original covenants, conditions and restrictions, CC rupees, for our development, the master document filed when the neighborhood was built. I sat in my car in the parking lot and compared it, page by page, with the 4-inch binder of rules Brenda had given me. It took me 2 hours, but then I found it. The section she had cited in her newsletter, the one supposedly giving the board the right to amend bylaws for emergency access, was completely different in the original document. In the official CC rupees, that section simply stated the board could enter a property's yard, not the house, to perform necessary maintenance, if the homeowner failed to do so after multiple warnings. Her version, the one in my binder, had been subtly but significantly rewritten. The word dwelling had been added. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery. She had literally altered the founding legal document of our community to give herself the power to enter our homes. This was the smoking gun. This was what would bring her entire kingdom of beige houses and manicured lawns crashing down around her. And the master key policy was the perfect bait to lure her into the trap I was about to set. Armed with the knowledge that Brenda was basing her power on a fraudulent document, my entire strategy shifted. This was no longer about defending against petty fines. It was about launching a full-scale campaign to remove a tyrant, but a direct assault would be foolish. She held the perceived power, and a public accusation without overwhelming, irrefutable proof would just look like sour grapes from the guy with the vicious dogs. I needed to build an ironclad case. I needed allies, and I needed to understand the full scope of her corruption. My first stop was Dave Miller. Dave was a retired accountant who lived 3 houses down. I'd met him a few times while walking the dogs, on a leash, on the street, as per the rules. He was a quiet, gentle man who always had a kind word. In our first conversation about the HOA, he'd let slip a comment, "Brenda's a real piece of work, isn't she?" That told me he was on the right side of history. I went to his house with a peace offering of a 6-pack of craft beer and my copy of the original county-filed CCRs. I laid it all out on his dining room table. The violation notices, the doctored bylaw, the newsletter about the master key. Dave listened patiently, his brow furrowing deeper with every document I showed him. When I pointed out the discrepancy between the official CCRs and Brenda's version, he let out a long, slow whistle. "I knew she was crooked," he said, shaking his head. "I just didn't know it was this blatant. Forgery of a legal document, that's not just an HOA violation, that's a crime." He told me stories of how Brenda had consolidated her power over the years. She'd joined the board, then driven out anyone who disagreed with her through a campaign of targeted harassment and fines until only her cronies were left. Most residents just paid the fines and kept their heads down to avoid the drama. No one had ever challenged her with actual evidence. "This key policy is the final straw for a lot of people," Dave said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound fire. "They're scared of her, but they're more scared of her having a key to their house. What do you need from me?" "You're an accountant," I said. "I have a feeling her creative writing isn't limited to the bylaws. The HOA is required to provide financial statements to any homeowner who requests them." "I'm going to request them. When I get them, would you be willing to take a look?" Dave grinned. "Alex, there is nothing I would enjoy more than performing a forensic audit on Brenda Clark's books. Nothing." My first ally was secured. The next day, I sent a formal, legally worded request via certified mail for the last 3 years of the HOA's complete financial records, including detailed bank statements and vendor invoices. As expected, Brenda stonewalled. The bylaws required her to produce the documents within 15 days. On day 14, I received a package containing a 1-page, high-level summary budget. It was useless, showing broad categories like landscaping minus $40,000 and administrative fees minus $15,000, with no detail. It was a deliberate act of non-compliance. This was exactly what I'd anticipated. I had my lawyer draft a much sterner letter, citing the specific state statute that governed HOA transparency and the penalties for non-compliance, which included personal liability for board members. The letter stated that if the full, unredacted records were not provided within 7 business days, we would file a motion with the court to compel their release, and would seek to have the board members held personally responsible for all legal fees. That got their attention. 6 days later, a large, begrudgingly packed box arrived on my doorstep. It was 3 years of disorganized, poorly copied financial records. It was a mess, probably by design, meant to intimidate and confuse. But for a man like Dave, it was a treasure map. For the next week, Dave's dining room became our war room. He spread the papers out, armed with a calculator, a ruler, and a pot of black coffee. I acted as his paralegal, organizing documents and cross-referencing names and dates. It didn't take long for the pattern to emerge. The landscaping costs were absurdly inflated. The pool maintenance company seemed to be charging triple the market rate. But the real gold was in the administrative and consulting fees. There was a recurring monthly payment ranging from $500 to as much as $2,000, made out to a company called Suburban Solutions, LLC. "I've never heard of them," Dave muttered, scribbling on his notepad. "There's no contract in here, no scope of work, just invoices, And look at this invoice. He held one up. It was incredibly generic. For consulting services rendered, that's all it said. This is classic shell company behavior. While Dave dug into the numbers, I took the company name and went to work online. I ran a search through the state's public database of registered corporations, and there it was. Suburban Solutions, LLC. Registered agent and sole officer, Brenda Clark. The address listed for the business was a P.O. box in the next town over. She was paying herself. She was using our HOA dues to pay herself a secret, unapproved salary for consulting, laundering the money through a shell company she controlled. Over 3 years, Dave calculated, she had paid her own company more than $80,000. We had it all: forgery, mail fraud, by sending the fraudulent demands through the Postal Service, and now, clear-cut embezzlement. The master key policy wasn't just about power. It was a way to cement her control and prevent anyone from ever getting close enough to uncover her financial crimes. She was a cornered animal, and her insane demand for our keys was her lashing out, trying to re-establish the dominance she felt slipping away. All I had to do was let her think she was winning. I let the 30-day deadline for the key policy pass. On day 31, as expected, another certified letter arrived, a fine for $25 for non-compliance. I ignored it. Day 32, another one. Day 33, another. She was papering my file, building her case for whatever punishment she was planning. But every letter she sent was another piece of evidence for me. It was another nail she was hammering into her own coffin. The pressure was building. I knew she would eventually snap. I just had to be ready when she did. The weeks leading up to the 3 a.m. incident were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Brenda was escalating, and I was responding with a tactic she couldn't comprehend: calm, surgical precision. For every fine she issued for my non-compliance with the illegal master key policy, I sent a polite, formal email back to the entire board, not just her. In each email I simply stated, "I am in receipt of your notice dated date. As this policy is based on a provision not present in the official county-filed CC/Rs and is in direct violation of state property law, I am legally unable to comply. All rights reserved." I attached a scan of the relevant page from the county document to every single email. I was creating an undeniable record that the entire board was aware of the illegality of their actions. Brenda's responses, which I could tell she was writing herself despite being from the generic HOA board email address, grew increasingly unhinged. They went from formal to demanding to outright threatening. One email accused me of endangering the entire community and warned of severe sanctions, including placing a lien on my property. All of this was digital gold, saved and backed up in triplicate. She was so blinded by her rage at my defiance that she didn't realize she was handing me the rope to hang her with. The breaking point, the catalyst for her late-night visit, was my final, formal letter. After consulting with my lawyer, we decided it was time to put her in checkmate. We drafted a cease and desist letter. It was a beautiful piece of legal prose. It laid out in excruciating detail every single one of her transgressions. It cited the forgery of the CC, rupees, referencing the official county document number. It outlined the illegality of the master key policy under state law. It referenced her campaign of harassment and the litany of baseless fines. And, for the finishing touch, it stated that we had grave concerns about financial mismanagement and potential malfeasance by the board, and that we were formally demanding a third-party forensic audit of all HOA finances to be voted on at the next general meeting. We sent this letter via certified mail to Brenda, and also to the 2 other board members, a mousy woman named Carol and a retired golf enthusiast named Gary, at their home addresses. This was a critical move. It prevented Brenda from intercepting the letters and claiming she was handling it. It forced Carol and Gary to know, without a shadow of a doubt, the full scope of what they were complicit in. It was a declaration of war, and it sent Brenda over the edge. I knew she would react poorly. I just didn't expect a full frontal assault on my front door. Which brings us back to that night, 3:17 a.m. As I stood in my darkened hallway, watching on my phone as Brenda kicked my front door and shrieked about her emergency inspection, my dogs going ballistic behind the door, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. The final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Her complete and total unraveling, captured in high-definition video and audio. She was no longer just a bully with a binder, she was a criminal attempting to force entry into a private residence. My protocol was simple. I didn't engage with her. I didn't shout through the door. I simply dialed 911. I kept my voice level. Yes, my name is Alex. My address is 123 Dogwood Lane. There is a woman, my HOA president, on my front porch, attempting to force entry into my home. She is kicking the door and screaming. Yes, she's still there. No, I am not in immediate danger, the door is secure. But she is clearly unstable and committing a crime. I made sure to use specific, legalistic terms. Attempting to force entry. Unstable. I also added, ma'am, for the officer's information, I am a retired military K-9 handler. I have 2 trained K-9S in the house. They are secured, but the woman's actions are agitating them. The situation needs to be de-escalated. It took the police about 4 minutes to arrive. The sound of a siren screaming down our sleepy suburban street was apparently enough to snap Brenda out of her rage. On my camera feed, I saw her eyes go wide with panic. She scurried back to her Range Rover and sped off just as the first patrol car turned onto our cul-de-sac. 2 officers, a man and a woman, approached my door cautiously. I opened it, my hands visible, and stepped out onto the porch. Ghost and Shadow were behind me in the doorway, sitting perfectly still and silent on my command. Their presence was imposing, but their discipline was obvious. She's gone, I said to the officers. Fled as soon as she heard you coming, but I have it all on video. I invited them in and played the footage for them on my living room television. They watched, their expressions shifting from bored skepticism to genuine shock. They saw her trying the keys. They heard her muttering about illegal lock changes. They saw her bang, then kick the door. They heard her scream about her authority. The female officer just shook her head. Okay, she said. This is not a standard HOA dispute. The male officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Miller, looked at Ghost and Shadow with a knowing eye. Military? He asked. Yes, sir, I replied. 15 years. These 2 were my partners. His demeanor changed. It was a small thing. A shift from civilian to officer to veteran. She's lucky that door is solid, he said, nodding toward it. She has no idea the danger she put herself in. I know, I said. That's part of the problem. She's completely detached from reality. They took my full statement. They took a copy of the video file. They filed an official police report for attempted unlawful entry and vandalism, noting the scuff marks from her expensive shoe on my freshly painted and HOA-approved taupe door. The report was the final stone in the foundation of my case. With this, I wasn't just an angry homeowner anymore. I was the victim of a documented crime. The next morning, armed with the police report number, I initiated the final phase of the plan. Through my lawyer, I sent a formal notice to all 120 homeowners in our community, invoking a clause in the Real CC, rupees that allowed residents to call an emergency meeting with the signatures of 25% of the homeowners. Dave and I had spent the previous week discreetly gathering those signatures from neighbors fed up with the master key policy. The notice was simple. It called for an emergency meeting in the community clubhouse in 1 week's time. The agenda item was listed as a review of a major security incident and a vote of no confidence in the current HOA Board of Directors. Brenda couldn't stop it. The meeting was official. She was walking into a trap of her own making, and I was going to make sure every single one of her neighbors had a front row seat for the detonation. The night of the emergency meeting, the community clubhouse was buzzing with an energy it hadn't seen since the Christmas potluck. Nearly every household was represented. People were crammed into the cheap folding chairs, standing along the walls, their faces a mixture of curiosity, annoyance, and apprehension. This was it, the public square. The place where Brenda's reign would either be decisively ended or, improbably, reaffirmed. I felt the familiar pre-operation tension, a low hum of adrenaline that sharpened my focus. Dave gave me a solid nod from the front row where he'd saved me a seat. He had a neat stack of financial summaries ready to go. Brenda arrived, flanked by her 2 loyal board members. Carol, and Gary. She swept into the room like a monarch entering her court, dressed in a sharp cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She carried a leather-bound portfolio and wore an expression of supreme confidence tinged with irritation. She clearly believed this was a minor insurrection she could quash with a sharp tongue and a few condescending remarks. She completely underestimated her neighbors, and more importantly, she completely underestimated me. She took the podium and banged a small gavel. "All right, let's get this nonsense over with," she began, her voice dripping with disdain. "I understand a certain resident, new to our community and apparently unfamiliar with how civilized people live together, has stirred up some baseless concerns. She didn't use my name, but every eye in the room flickered to me. He has a problem with rules. He has a problem with safety. He keeps dangerous, aggressive animals and refuses to comply with basic security protocols that are for his own good." She went on for 5 minutes, a tirade of lies and half-truths, painting me as a reclusive troublemaker who was a threat to the neighborhood's idyllic peace. When she finally finished, breathing heavily, she glared at me. "Do you have anything to say for yourself before we vote to dismiss this ridiculous meeting?" "I do," I said, my voice calm and even. I walked to the front of the room, where I had already set up a projector and a laptop. "Thank you for that introduction, Brenda. I won't need 5 minutes. I just need to show everyone a few documents and a short video." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's eyes narrowed. This wasn't on her script. I clicked the first slide onto the screen. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was a high-resolution scan of the official CC rupees filed with the county. On the right was a scan of the same page from the welcome binder she distributed. I used a digital red pen to circle the relevant paragraph in both. "As you can see," I said, using a laser pointer, "the official, legally binding document gives the board authority to enter your yard for maintenance. The document President Clark distributes has been altered to include the word dwelling. This is the basis for her master key policy. It is, to be blunt, a forgery." Gasps rippled through the room. Brenda went pale. That's a typo. A clerical error," she sputtered. "A clerical error that conveniently grants you the unprecedented and illegal power to enter our homes?" I asked rhetorically. I clicked to the next slide, which brings me to the finances. I nodded to Dave. He stood up. "As a retired CPA and a homeowner here," Dave said, his voice steady and authoritative, "I reviewed the financial records that the board was legally compelled to turn over. For 3 years, we have been paying thousands of dollars a month to a vendor called Suburban Solutions, LLC, for consulting services. These payments total over $80,000. He paused for effect. "What President Clark failed to disclose is that she is the sole owner and officer of that company." The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions. "You're paying yourself with our money?" someone yelled from the back. Brenda was frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Gary and Carol looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. "And finally," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "the major security incident mentioned in the meeting notice." I clicked play on the video file. The grainy, time-stamped footage of my front porch at 3:17 a.m. filled the large screen. The entire community watched in stunned silence as their HOA president fumbled with keys, rattled the doorknob, and then began kicking my door, her face a mask of pure rage. Her shrieks about emergency inspections echoing through the clubhouse. When the video ended with her panicked retreat from the sound of police sirens, there was a dead silence in the room. No one knew what to say. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, "This is not about lawn aesthetics or trash cans. This is about systematic abuse of power, financial corruption, and criminal behavior. The police report for this incident is a matter of public record." I looked directly at Brenda. Her face was ashen. The cream-colored pantsuit suddenly looked cheap and ill-fitting. The Queen's power had vanished. She was just a woman in a room full of people who now knew exactly who she was. The vote of no confidence was immediate and unanimous. Not even Carol and Gary dared to vote in her favor. They were both removed from the board, along with her. Dave was immediately nominated to lead a temporary transition board to sort out the mess. Brenda, without another word, turned and fled the clubhouse, her husband trailing behind her like a kicked puppy. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The new board, led by Dave, hired a professional forensic accounting firm. The final tally of Brenda's embezzlement was closer to $95,000 when they uncovered all the inflated invoices and kickbacks. The county district attorney, presented with our meticulously organized file of evidence, the forgery, the financial records, the police report, the video-filed criminal charges. Brenda was facing counts of embezzlement, wire fraud, and forgery. To pay for her legal defense and the court-ordered restitution, she had to sell the white Range Rover. 6 months later, under the cloud of disgrace and impending legal doom, she and her husband sold their house for a loss and disappeared. Our community healed. The HOA was restructured. The bylaws were rewritten to be simple, fair, and, most importantly, legal. The 4-inch binder was replaced with a sensible 10-page pamphlet. Dave became the permanent treasurer, and the board became a group of reasonable people focused on actual community needs, not on measuring the height of their neighbor's grass. My life finally found the peace I'd been looking for. Ghost and Shadow spent their days sunning themselves on the deck, their perimeters secure. Sometimes, I would watch them, these two loyal partners who had been through so much with me, and I'd reflect on the strange, quiet war we had fought and won right here in our own backyard. It turns out, the principles are the same everywhere. Stand your ground, gather your intelligence, and never, ever underestimate your opponent's capacity for self-destruction. And above all, know that when you fight for what's right, you're never really fighting alone.